Hey everyone, we have a new episode for Shuffle Podcast, and we are here with Rachel Katz. Hey Rachel, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, nice to meet you.
Oh, nice to meet you too.
Nice to pretend we didn't just meet a few minutes ago.
Nice to be together finally. I'm really excited to have you here. I read a little bit of your research a few months ago, and because you're really busy, we are finally recording this. Would you like to introduce to our audience?
Sure. Hi, I'm Rachel Katz. I'm a research fellow at the University of Salford in digital health and society. And my research specialism is dating apps.
Nice. How did you got into researching how we date?
I am pretty old school in that I have been researching dating apps pretty much since they came on the scene. I was living in New York, and it was around 2014, 2015 when suddenly I looked around me and everyone I knew was on Tinder. It just took over. And at that point, I became really interested to examine it from a research perspective because I was just finishing my undergraduate around that time. And from there, I've been absolutely fascinated, and it's stayed around, which is great. I remember when I first started studying them and I wrote my thesis on them, I had a professor say to me, "Why would you be studying that? This is just a trend. It's going to go away really soon. It's not really worth your time." And I'm so glad I stuck with it because here we are, 10 years later, and it's still very much a part of people's everyday lives and everyday dating lives.
Yeah, that's true. I think everyone has downloaded at least once dating app in our phones. How do you feel it has changed from like when you started by now?
I remember there was a lot more stigma around using a dating app back then. And even at that time, there was still more stigma around using a dating website. And then dating apps were kind of like an interesting intervention, had a different vibe. And, you could use them on the go. They're mobile, they were maybe more fun, and younger people were using them, whereas at the time, I think there was the perception that, only, quote, old, desperate people would use a dating website, but apps were, quote, something different. And I think they are different in a lot of ways, which is part of what I study. But I think even at that time, it was still a little bit weird to use a dating app, especially if you were kind of looking to meet a long-term partner or, kind of serious or intentional about your use, especially at that time. I think nowadays there's just a lot less stigma around dating app use. There's still a little bit, and people still tend to judge them as kind of superficial because they often have like a lot of images on them. But I think there's still a lot more openness about using them now and less judgment than there used to be.
Oh, that's for sure. I remember when I got to uni, like many, many years ago, I tried Tinder, and it was like everyone was trying to look for the best picture, and I think it was Picnic that used a lot of filters at that point. So
yeah, and I think also there was like it's unrealistic, the kinds of pictures you saw. But I think that was more the case with dating websites. I think for some of my initial research on dating apps about how people choose their profile pictures shows that people are really looking to have an authentic version of themselves on the app. And I don't just mean in terms of pictures, actually. I just mean in terms of like their appearance and also what the pictures capture them doing. They don't want just a picture of them in the middle of nowhere. They want something that says a little bit about their personality and their values, like a picture of them hiking or traveling. That's a common one we see now. Or even there was someone I had who was a participant who had a picture of him at a political protest because that was something really important to him. And I think it also ties into a lot of social theories about people wanting to be accepted for who they are. You want something that's flattering but still realistic because you're looking to form that meaningful connection a lot of the time, even if that connection is a casual connection.
That's true. I have seen a lot of hiking, which I'm not an outdoor person, so I swipe left on those ones.
Right, but maybe that person is trying to say, hey, I'm like an outdoor person, and they're looking for that. It's not just like an accident that they chose that. And I think now is,
sure. Yeah. For sure, it's like people trying to show their hobbies more nowadays than before. Even 5 years ago, before COVID, I will say people are showing more like what they do in their free time or if they work from home. How do you research dating apps? So how do you do your research?
That's such a good question. I mean, there's so many different ways to research dating apps, and I guess there's no perfect way. So sometimes I spend a lot of time thinking what's the best way to answer this problem. Usually I come up with a research question. When I think about maybe unconventional uses of dating apps, some of my research was on tourism. So I think like, how does tourism affect local dating app experiences, for locals and tourists on that app? And so the way I come up with the methods, I've used a couple different ones. I've used surveys, interviews, I've done content analysis, but the way I usually start is by thinking of what is the research question or what's the problem I'm trying to solve. I come up with the question. And then I think, what would a solution look like? You know, if I'm thinking about like how to fix, you know, problems on a dating app, like interactional problems, like let's say people fighting in the chats or whatever, what's one way to do that? What's one answer, you know? And so I would kind of start from there and say, okay, would a survey give me the kinds of data that I can look at to answer that question? Or would an interview, you know, an in-depth interview where you can kind of get into the nuances? Sometimes people feel very shy about certain aspects. For example, if they're using a dating app for casual sex, or if someone is queer and they're maybe new to being open with their sexuality, you know, sometimes an anonymous survey is actually a better way to get at that data than having someone do an interview. It just really depends. I think dating app companies have the juiciest data, of course, because they have the actual, you know, user sets. When you're an academic, you're always researching from the outside. So you kind of have to have, you're never going to have a perfect picture from like a big data perspective, but often you can ask different kinds of questions and get a lot of nuance and do research that maybe is unexpected or perhaps more focused on the individuals that are impacted by the social media or the dating apps.
You mentioned queer people, and a lot of research that I have seen nowadays is that dating apps are going on the low because people are preferring meeting in person, but the very specific queer dating apps are going really well. Do you think that's something specific for the public they are targeting, or is just like the kind of community they are holding?
I think there's two reasons behind that. So the first part I would say is that I think dating apps are still really popular, and some of the headlines we see are more about the financial side, you know, losing premium users and people who pay for dating apps. But I still think there's a very healthy amount of people using dating apps regularly. It's just whether the dating apps are profitable is a kind of a different problem and more of a business problem. There's also a lot of research to support the notion that queer men especially have been early adopters and enthusiastic adopters of digital media. So that is also websites and stuff going way back, not even for dating, just generally. And then, of course, for online dating and then dating apps. So Grindr came out, I think, in 2010. And it was a successful model in that there were a lot of people who were on there. And a lot of other dating apps aim to kind of mimic that model for straight people, but none were as successful as Tinder was. You know, Tinder was really different from Grindr at the time. It had a lot of different features and kind of focused on like one profile at a time, and the swiping that drew a lot of straight people into the dating app world. But I think because it's so well established among queer men, there's a lot more to their dating app use than just meeting and dating or even casual sex. You know, a lot of my research looks at other uses, especially among queer men. And for them, it's about community building, it's about loneliness, it's about different kinds of intimacy. Some of my research on Grindr tourism has looked at how people even get jobs, learn languages through Grindr. So it is more than just a dating app, even though that is like the main purpose of it in some ways. But it raises the age-old question, I should say, of like, why is there no equivalent for queer women? They tend to use more of the apps designed initially for straight people. So I think in some ways, like, yeah, we have a lot of queer adopters who are mostly men, but not necessarily women.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So I was going to ask a little bit about the dating tourism, because I'm guilty of that, very guilty of that. I normally use my dating apps to get around cities where I'm traveling, especially when I don't know the language. Even if I know the language, I think that's a very interesting way of using the dating apps.
Yeah, a lot of my research looks at unexpected or unconventional uses of dating apps, which has impact for health. You know, during COVID, I was working on a COVID Sex Lives project at the University of Salford, which looked at mental health and health ramifications of dating apps. And in my PhD at the University of Manchester, I did a study on Grindr tourism. And that was, as you would expect, mostly among queer men. But it was so interesting that it was such a known thing. If you said Grindr tourism, people knew what you were talking about, even if it wasn't like maybe a formal word in the dictionary at that point, although probably it is now. Now I call myself the Grindr tourism lady sometimes. And I think now there's also been some research on Tinder tourism, but a lot of it is overlapping in terms of the findings, which are about how people use dating apps in such multifaceted ways once they travel. And part of their use is kind of habitual, at least in my research. People would open the app because they were kind of used to it, and that was just part of their experience of like the physical world around them. But then people were also strategically using dating apps as part of their tourism experience, and they would intentionally try to meet locals as a way to kind of more deeply experience the travel destination. And sometimes that meant meeting in person, but sometimes it was just talking to somebody on the app and having just a nice conversation and getting restaurant recommendations or learning some new words. And other times in my research, again, it was like locals even took tourists around for tours, like, homemade tours. And for me, this was pretty interesting in terms of like a queer context. In previous times, a lot of travel was always done through like an institution, like a gay travel guide or like a tour, like you'd only stay in like a gay friendly hotel, for example. And this was all done, on an individual person to person level. So it was kind of outside of these conventional travel institutions. So for me, it was really interesting to see how people were individualizing, not only their dating life, but also like their travel life through these apps. I think you can make the same connection about dating. Dating used to be much more of a wider social experience. Like you'd meet somebody in person, let's say at your religious institution or like at work or, at school. And it was kind of a more visible thing. And now dating is much more individualized, like through the app and through your own kind of dating story and narrative and time you spend, pursuing that.
Yeah, I have never thought about it. Like you normally will date in your social circle, but nowadays you just try to find your perfect match if that exists. Yeah, that's an interesting take. How do you get to that, or like how do you see that playing in society now?
People frequently ask me, have dating apps killed dating or have dating apps ruined dating? Because they kind of blame dating apps as like the cause of social changes around, let's say, the individualization of dating or the source of any kind of negative dating experiences. But I also feel that dating apps were a solution to an issue. It wasn't like they didn't come out of a vacuum. People were struggling to meet our social expectations around what's an appropriate setting to kind of meet a partner. For example, like a lot of people don't want to meet their partner at work, or you have to talk to HR, or it's like awkward if you break up. Things changed. And so dating and people were struggling to meet, especially if you live in a rural location as well. So dating apps are like solving certain kinds of problems, but of course they also create other kinds of problems, as all technology does. That's something really important to keep in mind when we criticize dating apps. I'm an academic, so I think of myself as very like neutral in my approach to dating apps. I don't hate them and I don't love them. I'm just interested in like how people feel about them and their social impacts, and how we can conduct more research to kind of improve people's lives. Like, let's say, dating apps have health ramifications. They might have tourism ramifications. They might have social ramifications. They might have mental health and like personal growth ramifications. And I think all of that's actually really important from an individual perspective, that is helping shape someone's life trajectory and also everyday like life and well-being. So it's worth studying them.
Oh, how do you feel about the mental health in dating apps? Because a lot of people are, for my mental health, I will delete the dating apps, or I cannot be there because it's too much pressure or things like that. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I've done a lot of research about it. I guess all my feelings are based on my work. So they're not just feelings, right? They're I would say like, social scientific kind of opinions. But it's a double-edged sword with dating apps. My most recent project at the University of Salford about online dating and dating apps that we conducted, which was a national UK survey, we're still analyzing the results, but talked about certain aspects of dating app use, including negative experiences such as body shaming, racism, homophobia. I think most participants ticked off at least one of, the many boxes about negative experiences that they'd had on a dating app. But at the same time, again, in a previous study I'd done about COVID and queer men's use of dating apps during the pandemic in our COVID Sex Lives project, we also found that they had a big mental health benefit for some people, because if someone was living, maybe by himself or maybe at home with parents, and he was, had to go back in the closet a little bit, or just didn't have any like other gay people to meet, he some people just felt very cut off. And so that was a way for them to improve their mental health. And in that study, we had somewhere around 30% of our participants say that they use dating apps to combat loneliness. Oh, wow. So I think dating apps can have really good aspects in that way. People can make connections, especially, weird times where you wouldn't necessarily be able to go meet a person in real life, but you can kind of chat with somebody on an app. But at the same time, there are also places where there's a lot of negative encounters that happen to people, usually caused by other people. But I think the apps have a very important role to play into improving that situation and kind of preventing all those negative experiences too.
Yeah, for sure. Having the perfect picture in a dating app is so important, I think.
I think so too, but a lot of people, I mean, also I'm an quote unquote expert on this stuff. So sometimes people show me their app and I'm thinking, what are you thinking with a picture like that? And they'll look fantastic in real life, and I'm just like thinking, oh, wrong impression there and stuff. And yeah,
right?
Yeah.
It has happened to me so many times that they post like the worst pictures, or like all of the pictures have sunglasses.
Yeah. I think there's some consensus around what the red flags are, but maybe people are not very aware of what those red flags are. And I know sometimes dating apps will try to have like tips located in certain places, like on the website or in the app or whatever. I don't know if people always read them. And yeah, I feel sorry for people who are struggling in that way. And it's also very hard. I know recently Tinder had in their news, they had recently had a press release where they talked about, having some new features, including like using it with friends and stuff. And I think that was something I studied when dating apps I wouldn't say first came out, but one of my initial research projects on dating apps also looked at like group use. And a lot of people were using them as a group back then. I'm not sure if that's the case at the moment, but I think there's potential for people to use them together and perhaps help each other a little bit in catching out the bad photos, and also like having a friend choose a flattering photo for you or something, they can kind of maybe make you feel better because they'll want to emphasize all the good parts that they like about you as a friend, and then you can kind of get that on the app. Yeah.
No, for sure. I think it's very, very interesting how you see yourself and how other people see you. And a lot of people have done that experiment on TikTok.
What's that one?
That create two profiles. So you will create your own profile and you will choose the pictures, and your friend will do the profile that they think you will have and see which kind of matches do you get.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, because it's really interesting how people perceive, like, oh, he's goofy, or he's just a douchebag. And that comes from a picture.
Yeah. Do you have any pictures you changed or regretted later or something?
Oh, yeah.
Or do you just change them out? Like what?
I had a lot of pictures during my uni, before starting uni, that they were like really cringy. Well, they weren't cringy, but at the moment, like 2013, 2014, but seeing them now, it's just like, why did I post that?
Yeah.
Did you ever use a dating app?
I feel like I've always pretty much just used them from a research perspective, but I've had interesting experiences where sometimes I need to look at them sometimes. So I have a researcher profile and it explicitly says I'm a researcher on there because I don't want to be, conducting academic malpractice, and I want to be transparent, with like my interactions with people on the app. And of course, the terms and conditions have changed, so I have to be careful about what I put on my profile. But I do remember, I think this was before the time when you couldn't put you were definitely allowed to put, let's say, like a survey link if you were doing research in your profile. Or maybe I was just asking for people. I was saying I was doing this research project. Could you reach out to me? And I remember getting this one guy who was like, research, sure, interesting technique to meet men, and he just didn't believe me, but I was being genuine, and at some point he even got a little bit aggressive. We always have our bad dating. He got so aggressive, and I just felt so weird about it because it was a very legitimate situation, and he thought it was all a ploy to get some kind of date. And actually, interestingly, so I kind of thought that was like a one-off experience, but I was reading an academic article by somebody who was also talking about being an academic researcher and using dating app profiles. And he talked about how, again, it was that kind of transgression of oh yes, you're a researcher, but let me be, let me send you my nudes and let me kind of push that boundary or something. I don't know. So it kind of invites negative attention sometimes if you're, it depends probably, but if you're on there explicitly as a researcher. But at the same time, I've had a lot of really interesting people tell me, about their experience, especially if there's a new update or something. I like to kind of go in and see when I get the chance. Yeah, so I would say not really on it like a normal person. Yeah, but I'm not single anymore, so no need to be on them.
So you, at the beginning of the podcast, you said you are old-fashioned, but you research your dating apps and you met your partner the old-fashioned way, I assume.
Yeah, I would say, am I old-fashioned? I don't know if I'm old-fashioned. I would say I'm old school in that I was studying them for a long time. But I did meet my partner the old-fashioned way, which was in graduate school. Oh. But people always ask us if we met on a dating app. But a fun fact about me is that I also officiate a few weddings from time to time between friends of mine. And a lot of them meet on dating apps. And so I don't think that's why they want me to officiate, but it's a nice little bonus. It's so I feel like that's my, closer personal relationship with people that meet on dating apps. is marrying friends that keep meeting on them, which is a great honor to do.
But that's interesting because like 10 years ago, you wouldn't say like you met on a website or you met in a dating app. Nowadays, it's like a more common way to say that you meet someone.
Yeah. And I think especially since COVID, that really like curtailed a lot of people's life trajectories and plans. And so I think before there was I think there's still stigma, but like before there was more stigma. Now it's like, you say to your friends and family, they're just happy you found somebody, because it's scary to think about where your life was going at that time or whether you'd meet somebody or what the world would be like. I think that still has a ramification, later on down the line.
Yeah. What did you thought about Tinder Passport during the time of COVID? Because they made it free for a while.
Yeah. Well, again, it goes back to, do you know the term affordances? It's like a social theory and technology term. But so affordances are like features of technology, and they afford you to do certain things. They allow you to do certain interactions and things. And it was interesting that initially with things like tourism, sometimes people go along with the affordances of a dating app or with the features. They're like, oh, you meet and you swipe. But a lot of times people also try to counteract and contradict the affordances. There's a lot of academic research on this. So that might be something like swiping only right a million times to try to, get only chats with people that already match with you, let's say. And then Tinder has now put in something to fix that problem of using incorrectly. And it's the same thing with the travel. It's like people would open the phone in their pockets and then go in the subway and stuff, or like kind of strategically use the app to meet people somewhere they don't normally live, where it's not really possible to have a relationship, or maybe you're even just stopping through. And so I think these dating apps see these patterns of behavior that they don't expect and haven't planned for and haven't built for. And then they kind of have to work around that in some way. And some ways is like maybe curtailing it and stopping the practice, whatever that person is doing. And in other cases, like with the Tinder Passport, they're building it into it. And so now they have, then they created a passport feature. And then of course they charged for it. They put it behind a paywall to an extent. But yeah, one of my research projects about COVID and dating during COVID was also about how dating apps modified their offerings for the pandemic, including things like the passport feature.
Yeah, I actually know of someone who met their husband through Tinder Passport, and they are now married and living in Italy. But
Nice.
that's an interesting way to, because during COVID everyone was happy to talk and have like a parasocial relationship because you didn't know people. But a lot of people really created relationships, long distance relationships that eventually become relationships. Do you think that changed the perspective of like intercultural relationships, or it was just the moment and the time and everyone was just bored at home?
It's so interesting because back when internet dating websites were created, there was this very romantic notion of love, which was location will not stop you. You can find your soulmate even if they're halfway across the world. We are entering a utopian stage of relationships where you can find your soulmate. They could be, like you say, somewhere in a completely different country. And of course, we know that utopian vision has not come to fruition. And in fact, what ended up happening down the line of technology's development was hyper-localized dating, where people have gone back to meeting somebody within their 1 mile radius or even within 2 blocks. So I think that is still mostly there as a feature of dating, especially because a lot of my research emphasizes the importance of convenience when it comes to dating app choices in terms of communication and other kinds of choices people make on dating apps. So I think the convenience of dating apps allow people to meet people around them, so it's easier to meet up in real life. And you also probably have a lot in common. So I think that is there to stay as a thing people generally value. And COVID was probably the exception.
Sad. So we won't have like intercontinental relationships.
I'm not sure 90 Day Fiancé is selling it very well.
Oh my God. That show is really good though.
It's a little too real to me because I as like someone who's gone through a lot of visa stuff myself, I'm like, oh, I used to watch it. Now I'm like, it's too real. So I think it's interesting. Also with those additional features like the Tinder Passport, it's done so that people can like anticipate meeting up with people before they travel somewhere. So of course, if you travel somewhere, you could use Tinder's features like normal and meet people around you, but it's this kind of like planning your dating life, like planning who you meet. That it kind of permits you that luxury of doing it. And it's interesting that Grindr, I'm not sure if it still has this feature, but for a while it had a similar feature, and I think it was a free feature, and you could just browse people anywhere. Check out who from your hometown was good.
I think Hinge still has a feature that is free. You can still move around freely.
I wonder, I wish I'd asked this in one of my last studies, but I guess it depends so much on the app. But I wonder how many people use that feature, regularly. I'm not sure people do.
No, I think it's also like they don't publicize it that much. Like, it's not like they say like, oh, use Passport or like,
I would say in my research on dating app tourism, everyone, all the tourists and locals who met each other were meeting in that place that they went to.
Yeah.
They weren't like planning ahead.
Oh, interesting. Finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit of the health part that you were talking about your research. How does dating apps impact health or like public health?
Dating apps are so important for public health, and actually that's what justifies a lot of research, because if dating apps are where people are meeting sexual partners, that's potentially an important intervention point for any kind of sexually transmitted infections. We've also seen dating apps take on a public health role during COVID for having vaccine badges, for example, and promoting other kinds of like pandemic related health information, such as, stay home, or like, here's some practical steps you can take if you're going to hook up with somebody during COVID. And of course, now we see the same thing with monkeypox still being a concern. And I think this raises the question, which I'm really spending a lot of time contemplating, which is, what are dating apps' social responsibility, particularly around health, but also around other kinds of harms that they might be a platform for? And I think this plays into larger questions about also social media. What is their social role? Are they entirely private entities that should be completely hands-off, or do they have a responsibility? And how much is too much for them to be doing? So part of this question was looked at in my recent research project at the University of Salford. And we asked people questions about, like, how do you feel about encountering health information on a dating app? And this was building on a previous research project too. And it was interesting to see that, like, among queer men during COVID, we asked them a lot of different health questions about dating apps. And for them, it was important that the information was coming from like a trusted source, and that it wasn't in the same area as like an advertisement, which is often where it is, because like health charities will sponsor an advertisement to kind of promote a certain health thing, and then that will be where it's located. But there was also an issue around trust. So it's like someone could say they've had the vaccine badge and put the badge on. Someone could say they've had the COVID vaccine and put the badge on the profile, but they could be lying. And same thing with STIs. So it's also that aspect of trust. And then, well, would you want the dating app to verify whether they've had their vaccine? And then are they going to be privy to like holding medical information? Like, a lot of people are not comfortable with that. So it's a little difficult to kind of get the balance right. And it was interesting in our latest research that also this was, so among the queer population, generally people were more accepting of like encountering some kind of health information on a dating app. I think because of HIV and AIDS, there's more of a history among gay men having like health information like in those kind of areas where people are engaging in sexual practices and like interventions there, where straight people are really not used to that, even though of course straight people have plenty of STIs too. And so in our research, again, it was interesting to see people really like uncomfortable with the idea of information coming from a dating app. And they really wanted to make sure there was some kind of like external source of that information. Like, so I would suggest something like a partnership that's very overt. And also the placement of information is really important. A lot of times it's like really buried in menus, when you go deep into the settings, it's not really present like anywhere near the chat or like near a profile. And I think it's important to be having these conversations about, health in many different capacities, like general health, sexual health. Dating apps are really good intervention points for that, but they're maybe being underutilized. And also we need to better understand people's attitudes around it so that we can communicate important health information effectively.
That's interesting, especially the part of like where it's positioned, because if you see it as an ad, you wouldn't trust it that much. But if you see it as a part of the app, it's like, okay, this has been researched or this has been taken from a good side. That's quite interesting. Do you think people will keep using dating apps from here to like 10, 20 years later?
Oh, that's such a hard question. It's hard to, predict the future, right? They have some futurologists, so it's a job. Certainly not my job, but I'm not sure how trustworthy it is. I suppose it depends which field, but yeah, in the dating app field, I'm not sure it's that reliable. I think because we're not really privy to the long-term strategies are of a lot of these tech companies, and also because understandably, like this is the advantage of them being, smaller companies and tech companies, is that they can pivot and change their features really quickly and test new features and remove them. So it's really hard to say like long-term whether they'll still be around. Assume society will continue to change, so it's hard to say. But given the way things are now, I imagine they'll still be around for probably another 10 years. I could see it. Unless something came in and like really changed the game, But right now, in the dating app world and in the dating world, things are generally along the same premise of like you use your app to then encounter someone in real life.
I have two final questions, and one of them is, do you think people are looking for more serious, stable relationships now than 10 years ago?
I don't have data to support that. I would say it seems like people have always been looking for serious long-term relationships, but there's been a lot of discomfort about expressing that to a partner on a dating app. All the research I've been doing for the past 10 years have shown people really want a relationship from a dating app, no matter what the app, no matter who they are. Like, honestly, certainly in my last one, maybe 75% of people said they were on there to find like a serious relationship, but people are on the dating apps for different things. And sometimes they want different things at different times. So even if their overall goal is to meet a long-term partner, they're also looking for someone to chat with, maybe someone to hook up with, maybe also someone to, boost their ego and make them feel good by like, getting a lot of likes on their profile. So just because their overall aim is that one thing doesn't mean that they're not also doing other things. But I was in my research, one of my research projects, it was really interesting. I was interviewing women about dating apps, and I would ask them, oh, why are you on a dating app? And they'd say, oh, I want to get a boyfriend. And I'd say, oh, like, do you say that on the app? Like, how do you express that? And they're like, no, I would never. No. And like so many people said it, and like shocked that, at the notion. And understandably, I know how, dating dynamics are, and you don't want to seem desperate or eager, or like also maybe you don't want to commit because what if you're not interested in the other person? You want to have that kind of like way out. So you don't want to seem like, oh yes, I'm looking for this long-term partner. And then you can't let them down easy or whatever. So, but it was interesting to see that, like, I think part of having good interactions on dating apps with people is being open about your interactional goals. And people maybe still aren't. And certainly there's a bit of a discomfort around like seeming too serious, or like you're looking for this, and, kind of removing kind of the playfulness of meeting somebody, let's say, and turning into that. But a lot of our research on interactional clashes is about how people, it's about timing as well, and like having the same goal. So in one of these situations, it was like a person was receiving a nude photo, and he objected to receiving like the nude photo, and he, it was like a dick pic, and he was like, it's not that I didn't want to get a dick pic, but it was like we weren't there in the conversation, and it felt very sudden to me, and it felt kind of invasive. And so I think some of these aspects around like expressing what you want in that moment, or even what you want for being on a dating app the whole time, it's hard to find the right match between two conversation partners, like to get to that mutual understanding.
Yeah, like good chemistry is really...
It's chemistry, and it's like, I don't know, it's like reading the room maybe a little bit sometimes, or like asking even for consent, I don't know. Like you don't want to be like asking every single, is it okay if I say this to you or something? But there's a little bit of like a mismatch a lot of the time. I think when people have negative experiences, that is behind it to an extent.
Yeah, that's true. And then my final question before we finish is like, what is the biggest red flag do you still think that exists in dating apps?
Oh, that's such a, I wish, let me think about that. I would say, okay, I'd say anything that looks like a scammer. People hate a scammer. People don't want a scammer. So, like really fake photo, or like kind of blurry sunglasses, all that stuff. Anything that screams scammer. Like we know they're on there. People don't like them. Nobody's like, yes, bring on the scammer. So I think scammer vibes is like the biggest red flag. Yeah. What do you think? Do you agree?
Yes. Yeah.
What would you say the biggest one is?
The biggest one is the person who starts with a group photo.
Group photo.
Yeah. Because you don't know who is who. Like, even if you scroll down, it's quite difficult to determine who is who. So
well, some apps have like an automatic ordering. I don't know why it would automatically order for that, but sometimes they can like automate it so it's your most liked profile picture or your most viewed. Someone spent maybe someone is looking at it like, why are you doing a group photo, and that's altering the algorithm so that so it's giving you the group photo first because everyone's spending their time staring at the group photo being like, what has this person chosen? No, but yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah,
sure.
I think it's Bumble who has it like your more swiped photo.
Yeah.
Like the people.
Is it your most swiped? Okay.
Yeah, the people who liked the photo the most, that's your first picture. But why will it be the group photo is like, oh, you have hot friends. I will just meet you for your hot like.
Yeah. Maybe I'm sure they probably built that in like, oh, if it's got multiple faces, don't make it the.
Oh, hopefully.
I don't know.
If not, Bumble, please do it. But thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming to the podcast. This was really interesting, and I hope everyone learned something new about dating apps today. And I hope you come again.
My pleasure. Yeah.
There is a lot to learn still. Thank you.
Let's hope there's 10 more years of dating apps that will keep me
for sure.
keep me going for the research, and I'll be back. Yeah.
For
to
sure.
promote my latest article.